Hey everyone, Andrew here with Xidax, and today I'm going to be talking about the two newest cards from NVIDIA, the RTX 5080 and the RTX 5090. Now, we tested these cards in some games, kind of mix of old and new, and basically the way that we tested this was keeping everything at the highest settings possible. The reason we did this is for a couple of reasons. First off, a lot of people who buy a new computer just put the settings to max, not really understanding how to optimize for their game. Now, full disclaimer, anyone should take the time, depending on the game you're playing, to take time with the settings so that you can get the experience you're looking for. Whether that's you want to pump the graphics or you want to have higher FPS, just understand that the reason we did this is because it's basically the suboptimal way to do it. I'm trying to create the worst case scenario because a lot of people will get a new computer, put in their new game, max everything out, and then kind of wonder what kind of performance they're going to get. That's also good news because that means this is a worst case scenario for these cards. So if you guys take the time to optimize your games, you're going to get even better performance. So in the first slew of tests for the RTX 5080, the card is very performative. It sits somewhere between a 4080 Super and an RTX 4090 in terms of pure rasterization or just baseline performance. The main features that NVIDIA has toted on these new cards is basically their new frame generation or frame generation 4, along with more ray tracing, which I'm going to get into in a minute. In games like Call of Duty, we were getting anywhere from 80 to 100 frames at 4K max, and the reason I was testing in 1440p and 4K is that if you are going to be buying these cards, that's really where these sit. Now, if you want high-end 1080p performance, there's also a use case for that, but anybody who's going to be picking up an RTX 5080 or a 5090 typically is going to be shooting for 1440p or 4K. Dumping it down to 1440p, at least with the RTX 5080, and again, this is without any kind of not ray tracing, but DLSS turned on or frame generation turned on, we're getting around 100 to 120 FPS. So pretty respectable, but just know that the new Call of Duty Black Ops is very demanding to play. Now, switching over, if we're turning on frame generation, FPS goes up dramatically. This is one of the main features that the RTX 5080 and 5090 has to tout, which is their upgraded frame generation technology. For you guys who don't know how that works, basically, every time you render a frame, your GPU has to do all the heavy lifting. Frame generation uses AI to create frames in between the frames you're rendering, which is less intensive on the GPU, increasing your FPS. Now, the downside of doing it using frame generation is that you increase the latency dramatically. So in games that are shooters, you're going to actually notice kind of almost like a whiplash effect because the latency isn't quite matching up with the frames you're getting. But in single player experiences, it's obviously not going to matter as much. Frame generation will easily increase your FPS by as much as 50%, if not more. And then switching over to the 5090 in games of like Call of Duty, you're going to get blistering FPS even at 4K. The 5090 is somewhere, depending on the game, 50 to as much as 90% faster than a 5080. Again, game dependent. And that's one of the things that people who want high-end performance are definitely going to want to shoot for. All right, so Call of Duty was a game I wanted to showcase because, again, this is one of the most played shooters that's out on the market right now. And a lot of people are looking for higher-end performance. But if you're a guy like me, you typically are looking for high graphical performance and high FPS. And these are really the only cards that are capable of doing that, at least in the current market. Now, in terms of the other games we tested, Black Myth Wukong is a game that basically we're able to showcase all the features that NVIDIA, is basically pushing with these new GPUs. So, if we're talking about 4K and we're not turning on any kind of frame generation or DLSS, which is upscaling or ray tracing, even then, if we are maxing out settings, you're still talking about 60 to 80 FPS. You have to understand that even with these new GPUs, new games require a ton of hardware to push through. When we turn on DLSS and ray tracing with the RTX 5080, it's basically a requirement to turn on frame generation, otherwise you'll drop below 30 frames per second. With frame generation on and rendering at 100% scale, I was getting about 60 to 65 frames a second. So obviously a very, very playable experience, but it just goes to show how demanding it is. The RTX 5090, again, stepping in, you can expect anywhere from 50% or better in terms of improvement overall. So for you guys who are either graphically, intensive as far as what you want, the 5090 really is the card you want to go with. It's not that the 5080 can't do 4K, but for you guys who want the least amount of compromise as possible, basically it's the 5090 or nothing for, guys who want to have kind of experience of what I'm shooting for. Now, I decided to load up an older game, which is Hunt, that's actually been better optimized and is actually making a resurgence in terms of how many people like and play this game. Now, Hunt is a perfect example of DLSS in basically working condition because the game's been out for a while. So basically, when I was playing this in 1440p and 4K on both the 5080 and the 5090, my FPS with max settings was by no means bad. I was getting anywhere from 100 to 120 frames with the 5080 and 150 to 200 with the 5090, and this is without turning on any DLSS whatsoever. But because the game's been out for a while, this is really a showcase for this card's strength, because when you turn on DLSS, not only does the game look exactly the same, meaning you're not losing any of the graphical performance that you want, the frames per second jumped anywhere from 50 to 60%. So what I really like about these cards is that you have games you want to dip your toes back into that have been better optimized now that they've been out for a while. You're really going to use these GPUs to stretch those games further than you could before. Now, one of the other games I tested where the results weren't so good was Space Marines 2. Space Marines 2 is actually a personal new favorite of mine. I've never been a big Warhammer guy, but I absolutely love this game, and it's really gotten me into the universe. This game is very, very demanding with highest settings possible. It looks beautiful, but at 1440p, whether you're rocking on the 5080 or you're doing 4K with the 5090, it just takes a lot to run. I don't know if it was the testing methodology or it's just unoptimized for these new GPUs, but when I turned on DLSS, I was actually getting worse frames than I have with it on. That is something also I want to point out. Whenever we're talking about new technology, everyone's going to have a different experience, and as these new games come out, they do need to optimize a little bit because sometimes you get funky results like this. The last game I want to talk about is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I'm a big fan of this series, and the game looks absolutely beautiful with 4K, everything maxed out. Now, when you're playing these games, you can do either 50 or all the way up to 100% render, and basically that means that you're using either downscaling or upscaling on the graphics. I did 100% because, again, we're going for a worst case scenario. You guys can play with settings and get better, results than we did. But basically, with the RTX 5080, I was getting around 70 to 80 frames per second in 4K and only a little bit better in 1440p, and that was regardless of whether DLSS was on or not. When I turned it on, it was the same thing as Space Marines. I actually got worse results. Again, I think this comes down to driver optimization, so hopefully this will be something they patch out pretty quickly. The 5090, obviously you're going to get mind-melting FPS at 4K. The game looks absolutely insane. And so if you're the kind of person, again, who wants high performance and you're going to be playing in 4K, for me, the 5090 is the obvious answer. But for you guys who can't ball out on the 5090, the RTX 5080 is still an extremely powerful card. And if you're willing to make a few more compromises when it comes to the settings in the games you're playing, you're going to get an excellent experience. Either way, guys, if you're looking for a new computer from Xidax, we have the 5080 and 5090 available for order now. We'd be happy to help you get that PC of your dreams. And for all of you guys out there who aren't necessarily in the market for the newest, latest, and greatest, we still have excellent options across the board for anybody who's just coming into being a PC gamer to people who are like me, who basically build these monsters every year. Obviously we have an addiction and a problem, but we just call it a hobby. Anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.